Hello, this is John Boonstra of the Hartford Advocate.
Hi, this is Phil Dick.
Hello, may I call you Phil?
Yes, of course, please do.
Okay. It's a pleasure for me to be through to you here. I had a few questions which I wanted to ask. I want to run this interview in conjunction with a review of Valus that I'm going to be doing for the paper.
Okay.
Is it Valus or Valus?
Well, I guess Valus. Valus is what I usually say.
Okay. Well, you're the one who's entitled to say what you like, so...
Okay, yeah, I made up the acronym, right.
Okay. In an interview in the SF Review that you gave in September of 1976, you indicated that Valus had been sold to Bantam, yet it didn't appear until early this year. What was the cause of the delay?
I did a complete novel draft and then discarded it and started all over again and did a totally different version of the book based on the same material. The book that's in print is based on the second version of the novel. Also, Bantam held it up for a while because they had a change of editorship. The version that has been published was written in 1978, and for some, I guess they had a backlog. They didn't print it right away. But the real origin of the delay was the fact that I did, for the first time in my life, two completely different versions of the same book. The first version appears in the second version as the movie. That's the movie that they go see. That's the original novel.
When I was rereading the SF Review interview, that was the impression I was getting, and I wanted to know whether I was gleaning that correctly.
That is correct, yes, exactly. Yes, about Nicholas Brady and everything like that. That was in the first version. I wasn't satisfied with the first version. I wanted to do a book that was a novel that was better than my previous novel, Scanner Darkly. And even after Bantam had purchased Valus, and all it required was really that I type a final draft. I simply was not satisfied that I had done the best book I could do, so I preferred to wait and do a better book. Because I wanted to surpass a Scanner Darkly. I didn't want to do a lesser book than Scanner. And I was quite pleased with Scanner.
The term meta-novel is occurring to me here. The idea of framing an already existing novel by making it a much smaller segment of the novel, which is in effect about the process of living the novel. I'm gleaning that from John Lilly at this point, but I don't know where I'm making that connection. In its published form, Valus seems as candid as autobiography, particularly when it's read in conjunction with the Charles Platt interview in Dreammakers.
Yes, and also in conjunction with the introduction of the Golden Man.
Yes, that's right. And you described your encounter in 1974 with a transcendentally rational mind, which is a transformation that is central to Valus. Does this tutelary spirit that you mentioned continue to guide you?
It hasn't spoken a word to me since I wrote the sequel to Valus, which is called The Divine Invasion, that Simon & Schuster is bringing out in May. The voice that speaks to me, my priest, I'm an Episcopalian, identified as Ruach, R-U-A-H, which is the word that appears in the Old Testament for the Spirit of God. It speaks in a feminine voice, and it tends to express statements regarding the messianic expectation. And it guided me for a while. It has spoken sporadically to me since I was in high school. As I mentioned, I believe in the Platt interview. But I haven't heard from it for a while. It seemed to fall silent after I did the sequel to Valus. I expect, if a crisis arrives, that it will say something again. It's very economical in what it says. It limits itself to a few very terse, succinct sentences.
Is there a distinction between this voice and your being invaded and, in effect, taken over by a spirit in 1974?
I honestly don't know if I'm hearing the voice of that entity, which I call Thomas.
Yes.
I don't know if they're distinct or not. I really don't know. This is something that's puzzled me for a long time. I really don't know if I'm dealing with essentially two entities or one entity. As I said, I discussed it with my priest, and my description of it indicated to him that it was the ruach, which is a Hebrew word, but as to its relationship with Thomas, I just don't know. I mean, the psyche of Thomas is gone from my psyche now. It's been gone since 1974. I'm not aware of another psyche in my psyche anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm falling, I only hear the voice of the spirit when I'm falling asleep or waking up. It's either in hypnagogic or hypnopompic states that I hear it. I have to be very receptive to hear it. It's very hard to hear. It's extremely faint and distant. It sounds as if it's coming from millions of miles away.
I'm just thinking I'm going to have to make a special note regarding the use of the word hypnagogic in The Advocate. The last time I used that in print, which is in a review of R. Hitler, the copy editor had no idea what the word was, decided that the word didn't exist, and it appeared in print as hypnogenetic.
Well, I wonder what that means.
I don't know, but I thought it was a great construction.
It's a great new word. We'll have to search around and find a meaning for it. We've got a good word there.
Well, let me see what else I have here. I had a marvelous morning going through this huge stack of material. Let's see.
That's the way words should be coined. You should start with a word and then look around for a meaning. I mean, that's an interesting new way of developing language. Reminds me of Alice, and her saying, that this is about don't let words tell you what they mean, you tell them what they mean.
Makes sense to me. Two elements of your fiction, which have given me great pleasure for many years, are, how many years? Maybe a dozen years, are your respect for the individual at work, and I want to emphasize that work, in menial jobs that nevertheless may demand skill, and your perception of the mutability and the passion of human relationships. What is your own work background, and if you want to say anything at all about your own, personal background? I know you've been through a couple of marriages. At least. There's more. I hate to say how many. My work background, I was in the retail record business and hi-fi components. I managed a record store, a fairly large record store, one of the largest on the West Coast, in the 50s. And I had worked at a radio repair shop while I was in high school and after high school that later became a television retail outlet. And I was used to essentially a family type of work situation. And, in other words, where the boss is essentially the father of the family. And in the record store, let's see, I had 5 girls working for me. It was a little larger. Now, I guess that answers that question. As regards my personal background, an endless succession of divorces, all stemming from recklessly engaged in and seized upon marriages. I still have a good relationship with my ex-wives. I mean, in fact, my most recent ex-wife, there are so many that I have to list them numerically, and I are very, very close friends. And I have 3 children, and my youngest is 7, and she brings him over all the time. I see her and him every week. So, we're on really good terms. But the reason my marriages all break up is because I'm so autocratic when I'm writing. I become like Beethoven. I become completely bellicose, and defensive in terms of guarding my privacy. It's very hard to live with me when I'm writing. You've indicated in a few places that many of the characters who appear in your fiction are possibly thinly disguised variations of people you've known personally.
That is correct.
What effect has this had on them?
They hate my bloody guts. They'd like to rend me to shreds. I expect someday that they'll all fall on me and beat the crap out of me. It is normal for a serious author to draw on his own life, and he builds his characters as composites of people he's known. I mean, he doesn't take the person as the person literally is. He builds a composite. Nonetheless, it is a proclivity on the part of his friends to identify themselves with his characters, and they often do so spuriously. My characters are all composites. They essentially go back to the stores plural that I worked in the 50s, 40s and 50s, and I draw from my own life. I draw from my own personal experiences, and I draw from the people I've known. I find that you can only really develop characters based on actual people. There's really no such thing as a character that springs, ex nihilo, like Athena from the brow of Zeus. I mean, the great prototype for this, of course, is James Joyce. In the characters that appear in the Dubliners and in the later books, Ulysses and the Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. The author uses himself and he uses the people he knows, but he develops essentially composite characters. I mean, that's the name of that game. These are tendencies extracted from actual people. The people aren't transferred intact and as they actually are. I mean, this is not journalism. This is fiction. Basically, it's fiction.
Choosing the elements that you might want out of a particular individual and then putting them into a composite character.
Yeah. In other words, what you do is you take several people and you meld them. Somebody told me that's the wrong word. You blend them together, drawing elements from each one, so that you have something new. And yet there are origins in actual people. I mean, especially in the speech patterns. To me, this is the most important thing of all, is picking up the cadence of actual spoken English, because English is basically a spoken language, because it has that long period, when it was only the vernacular. And it really developed as a spoken language. And it's so important to get down speech cadences of people. That's the main thing I'm looking for, is the kind of speech cadences that people actually show, their little mannerisms, and their word choice.
Norman Spinrad and I guess Brian Aldiss have compared you to Dickens. I think Spinrad goes on to compare you to Herman Melville in that same piece. I guess it's an introduction to one of the great press editions. What tradition do you like to think of yourself operating within?
Neither of the two that he named. I have not read Dickens and I've not read Melville. The influence on me was the French realist novel. People like Flaubert and the Russian novelists that the French novelists influenced, Turgenev especially, and also some post-World War II Japanese novelists who had written in the French department at Tokyo University, who were influenced by the French realistic novel. To me, Stendhal and Flaubert would be the quintessence of that which influenced my structure and my idea of who I should write about and how I should handle the writing. Maupassant. I was reading Maupassant when I was in junior high school. When junior high school, I used to carry a paperback copy of the Maupassant short stories around with me. I just studied them and studied them.
Despite the critical books that have appeared on your work, like Philip K. Dick and the Umbrella of Light, and your popularity in Europe, and pieces like the Rolling Stone piece that Paul Williams did 6 years ago, and despite that tradition that you just mentioned, your fiction remains in the science fiction ghetto that, say, Kurt Vonnegut escaped, although, frankly, no one else comes to mind. Do you think of that genre label as a ghetto, and do you want to get out of it?
Well, I'm satisfied with my world reputation, in which I am not categorized within the ghetto. It's really just in the United States that I'm still stuck in the ghetto. I don't really care. I can't even, if you ask me at this moment to define science fiction, I couldn't even do it for you. I mean, it's like jazz. I mean, I won't quote any of the cliches, but I'm sure you know what I mean. I would rather reach a broader audience, but in no way do I repudiate the science fiction audience. But, yeah, sure, I'm reprocessing my own life. Well, I've had a very interesting 10 years. I mean, starting in 1970 when my wife Nancy left me and went off with a Black Panther, much to my surprise and amazement, as a result of which I hit the bottom. I mean, I just fell into the gutter. Literally, I just crashed into the street in shock when this happened. I was, very bourgeois. I had, wife and a child, and I was buying a house, and drove a Buick and everything, and wore a suit and tie and all those good things. And then all of a sudden one day my wife left me for a Black Panther, and I wound up in the street with street people. And then after I got out of that, which was ultimately, a death trip on my part, once I climbed out of that, I thought, well, gee, I've got some interesting first-hand material that I'd like to write about. I will recycle my own life in terms of a novel. Having done that, then I was faced with what I would do next after Scanner. And it took me a long time to go from Scanner to Valis. I mean, there's a lot of years of work, a lot of years of planning, and that discarded draft to Valis before I felt that I had what I wanted. And as I say, the basis of what I had was the picaresque novel, because once I had lived through the street period, I was used to being with rogues. I was used to the companionship of picaroons. Mm-hmm. I mean, it seemed natural to me to view people in that aspect. Now, prior to that, I tended to view people in terms of the artisan, which you pointed out yourself. I mean, because of my years, I worked like 8 years in retail selling. I tended to view people in terms of, the TV repairman, the radio repairman, the salesman, and so forth. Then later, because of my street experience, I tended to view people as essentially rogues, and I don't mean lovable rogues. It's not that kind of thing. I mean unscrupulous rogues that were out to hustle you at any moment for any reason. But I held nothing against them. I just found them endlessly fascinating. And it was really my fascination regarding the people that got me into writing this type of writing. I mean, I found the people really interesting, and I did not see them being put into novels. I didn't see them being adequately represented in fiction.
Your interview in The Dreammakers, and most everything you've written refers obliquely or directly to various psychotherapies. And I guess that's obvious in Valis in particular, that you've put yourself through therapy or therapies. What has been the effect of these therapies on your fiction?
Well, I've long been fascinated by some of the European psychiatric techniques, the existential psychiatrists of Switzerland, Ludwig Binswanger, that school, and Jung.
Jung is quite obvious in some of your, I guess, middle period books.
Yeah, I started reading Jung when I was in high school, at which point, in those days, there was very little Jung available, and I read all Jung that was in English, and as it was brought out by the Bollingen series, Pantheon Press, I read it as more and more is available. And, I'm really interested in psychiatric techniques in a theoretical way because of their analysis of what constitutes the human mind. I mean, the thing that I'm really interested in is the human mind and how it works. And I construe psychiatry and psychology as attempts to plumb, the human mind and to find out what it contains and what makes it work, and what really is consciousness and what the mind really consists of. As far as the actual therapy goes, I have yet to see an adequate functional therapy, an adequate, pragmatic therapy that works. They all seem to work equally well. It's so strange. I mean, it seems that no matter whether you're, Reich or Jung or strict Freudian, or, you can go from Melanie Klein, who is a very Freudian therapist,
right,
to people who are coming along now who have no relationship to Freud. I mean, everything from Burns, Eric Burns' views, on game playing on. It all seems to work about the same. I mean, you seem to get the same bell-shaped curve, in terms of your recovery rate. So I'm not too interested in therapy in terms of its actual practical application. I'm more interested in psychiatry in theory, in terms of philosophy of, going back to Schopenhauer, which is really the basis, Schopenhauer and Spinoza being the basis for modern ideas of depth psychology. I mean, the etiology of Freud is Spinoza and Schopenhauer, and that's what interests me, because I'm interested in the human mind and how it works. I'm fascinated by how the human mind works and the phenomenon of consciousness.
Well, it's fairly obvious, and that's also been the element that has attracted me to your work for the longest time, I guess. I had a couple of questions about Confessions of a Crap Artist, which we were talking about earlier. A friend of mine pointed out to me earlier today, and I recall this when I read the book, that various minute details from that book end up in your straight science fiction works. like the element of working as a tire regroover. I think that crops up in our friends from Frolix 8. And I think there's the name of some character that also appears in some later book.
In Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Jack Isidore appears again.
Right.
Both as a name and as a character.
That's intended to be the same character.
Yeah, it is. Exactly, yeah. I'm interested in that particular character. Matter of fact, there is really a relationship between that character, Confessions of a Crap Artist, and Valis. In a way, you can project Confessions of a Crap Artist into Valis and see the evolution of Jack Isidore. I mean, the protagonist, Horse Lover Fat, in Valis is really an evolved, older Jack Isidore. I mean, it's Jack Isidore now compared to Jack Isidore in the 50s when Confessions of a Crap Artist was written. And my next book will probably project him into the 80s. And he will have evolved and changed, again. But it will still be essentially the same character. I mean, he's not a static character. He is he does progress and change and grow. And in the 50s, he was different from Horse Lover Fat. But I was just looking at the two books the other night, Valis and Confessions of a Crap Artist, and I realized that I, in many ways, had gone back to Confessions of a Crap Artist when I wrote Valis, although I was not conscious of it when I wrote Valis. The first-person viewpoint, the involvement with the von Däniken sort of lumpen occult. That was true of Isidore. He was into all that stuff. I mean, that lumpen occult stuff was just where his head was at. And this is sort of the madness of the age. Is this ancient astronauts, from outer space landing, millennia ago on Earth, and setting up the great civilizations. I mean, if you wanted to stigmatize the superstitious basis of our era, that would be it. That's really where it is. And anybody, if you're going to depict somebody as a contemporary lunatic, you'd want to bring in astronauts, ancient astronauts, because this is where he's going to go. This is the area where he's going to surface. He's going to believe that space people landed in ancient Egypt and set the pyramids there, by using large lasers. And this is definitely Jack Isidore, still alive, still talking, still believing everything he's told.
Yep. Yeah, I can almost say that I recognize the character from an individual in my own experience who has been creating a history of the planet Saturn since he was about 12 years old, and although he's 30 years old, continues to do so.
Well, I have to admit that, like Jack Isidore, as I said in the introduction, to Paul Williams in the Confessions of a Crap Artist, Jack Isidore is my alter ego. Jack Isidore is like my shadow self in the Jungian terms. Mm-hmm. He is me as a mangy crackpot, and I like him,
That's obvious from Valis in particular.
Beg pardon?
That's the fact that you like him is obvious in Valis in particular.
I really like the guy. This is somebody who reads the Sunday supplements, and reads these junk occult novels, or junk occult. Well, they're put forth as fact, the von Däniken stuff, and just believes it all. There's just nothing he's not capable of believing. I mean, you have a person with infinite capacity to believe things. And there's a kind of optimism, a kind of a beauty in this guileless fool, which is what he really is. He's like Parsifal. He's a guileless fool, and there's a sort of charm in this personality, because he's essentially not suspicious. He's not hostile. He's not paranoid. He's not, cynical. You see, that's the thing. He just kind of wanders around the world as you get in a picaresque novel, encountering all these wonders. Everything is to him a great wonder, a miracle. And I think he's a very person, although his mind is completely stuffed with trash. I mean, he's just like a giant glad bag. His mind is a Titanic glad bag. Everything enters it, nothing leaves it, you see. If you told him there were 14 planets in our solar system, he'd remember that till the day he died. He'd never eject that data from his memory bank. His infinite memory for detail, of circumstantial facts which have no value to anybody. I kind of like him. I really do. I feel that very strongly when I read Confessions of a Crap Artist. This is really a very beautiful person.
I guess Confessions of a Crap Artist raises the question of the other unpublished mainstream fiction. Do pieces or characters or incidents that are in those novels appear transformed in your science fiction work?
Oh yes, I just plunder them mercilessly. Absolutely. I mean, I have just cannibalized them forever. That's one reason why I have no plans to publish them. Also, they're not written in a way that I would approve of. Now, they were naive products of my earlier period, where I had not completely mastered viewpoint and structure.
They came before Confessions?
Yeah, Confessions was relatively late in the sequence of mainstream books. I think I only wrote one after that, and I wrote none that I really liked the way I liked Confessions. I almost sold Confessions to Hardcore Break. They really liked it, and in fact, they gave me $500 just as a kind of award, just free money because I'd written it, although they couldn't publish it because they felt essentially there'd be no readership for it. But they really liked it, and they really wanted to bring it out. Now that book was influenced quite a bit by Nathaniel West. I was very, very, very influenced by Nathaniel West for a while. Mm-hmm. And my idea of the American novel, in other words, here now we're getting away from the European novel, the French and the Russian and Japanese novel, and into a idiomatic American novel with Nathaniel West. And when I wrote Crap Artist, I was thinking very much of Miss Lonely Hearts and just the whole Nathaniel West view of things.
Yeah. Was that the original title that you had on that novel?
Yep. Everybody tried to get me to change it, but I wouldn't change it.
Because it's easy to look at it as an outgrowth of the many years it took to finally see publication.
I didn't think it was ever going to get published. I had given up on it. We took it out to every publisher in America. Now in Europe, it's in trade editions. In France and England, it's in regular trade editions, not in small press editions. It's been very well received in France. Mm-hmm. Well, which is understandable, because there's a name for what Isidore is. It's Barjot in French, and there's no English equivalent. I had some French friends here, and they were trying to explain to me what Barjot means. And in French, the title is, Confession of a Barjot, and there's no English equivalent. It's kind of a nitwit, but they never were able to explain what it exactly meant. But apparently they've got a word for people like Jack Isidore over there.
David Hartwell was the publisher of Confessions of a Crap Artist. What's your relationship with him?
Well, I know David. I met David in 1972 at the WorldCon in L.A. And I don't know David anywhere near the extent that I know Paul Williams. Mm-hmm. But I've talked to him a number of times, and we have a very cordial relationship. David is very proper. I mean, like, he's not, counterculture in the way he dresses and the way he talks. And he's a very professional person.
Several of your books, I was talking with a friend this afternoon who is about as well acquainted with your work as I am. And I was saying, well, this is going to be going on. What do you think, Jeff? And he suggested that I ask about several books that, in his opinion, and not so much in my own, start off and then suddenly seem to change direction. And we argued about this a little bit, and examples of that were Ubik and Galactic Pod Healer, as far as he was concerned. He wanted to know whether, in fact, you began one book and ended up writing another in those cases.
That's exactly what happened, and especially, it's like Cinderella's older sisters. Each was uglier than the other. In the case of Ubik and Galactic Pod Healer, each got away from me more than the other did. I started out Ubik, and I didn't have any concept of them being killed, and the post-mortem existence in Kolpat. It's based on a story that I wrote called What the Dead Men Say. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I started out, and it struck me as I was writing the opening part that I had essentially on my hands an incredibly pedestrian book. And this is exactly what happened with Galactic Pod Healer. In each case, I started the book, and all of a sudden I realized it's plodding along in this pedestrian manner, which is redundant because all plodding along is pedestrian. And all of a sudden I said, well, I am bored by my own novel. And let us see if we cannot inflict on this novel some kind of joie de vivre, some kind of vitality. Mm-hmm. In which case, as long as it's already so pedestrian, I might as well just wing it and just go into, whatever flights of fancy I can, summon at this time, you see, to counteract this rather plodding opening. And so, yes, by all means, both books, they didn't exactly escape me in the sense that I lost control. It's just that they were essentially unplotted after the first, 40 pages. Mm-hmm. That they just, were like improvisation, like with jazz, like where I winged it, and didn't have any particular outcome in mind.
Were there other books that operated that way as well?
Yeah. Would you believe?
Somehow Maze of Death is coming to mind.
Okay, let's say. Okay, Man in the High Castle, oddly enough, got into that sort of thing, where I had no notes. I had nothing written down except the name of Mr. Tagomi, and that was my extent of my notes, plus all the research I had done on the Nazis and on the Japanese. I had a tremendous backlog of research. I'd done literally years of research. But I did not have a plot worked out for Man in the High Castle. Mm-hmm. But I used the I Ching in writing that, and it kind of, kept me honest throughout, by continually relating me back, to a sort of center, you see. But a lot of my books, I utilize happy accidents, as I like to call them, you see.
Yes.
Which is essentially, which is kind of jargon for whatever occurs to me as I'm going along. I mean, if I'm writing a book and an idea occurs to me in the process of writing it, I will incorporate that idea. I will not turn down a good idea. It's like, John Denver said about being a vegetarian, he could not turn down a good taco. I cannot turn down a good idea. If I'm writing a book and a good idea comes to me, even if it is completely, 180 degrees away from what I had planned, if it's a good idea, I'll put it in.
Well, it makes a lot of sense to me. What is your involvement in film that's being made based on Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, or do you have any involvement at all?
Oh, the Blade Runner project.
Yeah.
Yeah, they went in production this Monday. Yeah, well, it's really interesting because they won't utter word one to me. I have floated up a number of trial balloons trying to get them to communicate with me. They finally sent me a copy of the screenplay. They sent it through my agent. I know Hampton Fancher, who wrote the screenplay for Blade Runner. Mm-hmm. We met in 1974 and became rather good friends, as a matter of fact. And why they won't communicate with me, I have no idea. I just have no theory about it at all. They just, like, maintain a glacial silence in relationship to me. On the other hand, I haven't really tried to contact them. I mean, I could get hold of Fancher if I wanted to, probably. I used to have his phone number kicking around. He introduced me to Barbara Hershey, and she used to come down with her little boy and to play with our little boy. But I really don't know. It's a mystery to me why they haven't got in touch with me. I sent word to Fancher through an interviewer from Omni that I wanted to talk to him, and I got no response except a copy of the screenplay.
What did you think of Alien?
Oh, I didn't care for Alien at all. I thought Alien was all technical shock, graphic, visual impact, and not ideas. In other words, the ideas were the stock monster and spaceship ideas going back to Van Voogt's early stuff in Astounding. Right. That I've seen a couple times. I mean, sure, Geiger did a great job on the special effects. I believe Geiger did the special effects, did he not?
At any rate, he did the set designs, and I'm sure he designed the monster itself.
Well, whoever did the monster, I mean, that's a hell of a monster. If you have a great desire to see, the world's most horrifying monster, but really, ultimately, all it boiled down to was, a monster loose on a spaceship, and there was nothing new in the way of ideas. I mean, I deplore the substitution of graphic, visual effects for ideas. I think science fiction is basically a field of ideas, and this should carry over into the movie making. Mm-hmm. I mean, all they've really done is somewhere recently, the special effects people perfected special effects. That they came when all of a sudden they could simulate anything. There wasn't anything you could write they couldn't simulate. And these people have just run with that ball all the way to the goal line, in disregard of everything else. I'm afraid that's what they're going to do with Blade Runner. From the screenplay and from what I've read a number of articles, a number of interviews with Ridley Scott, and it would appear that they're going to go ahead. The screenplay, based on my novel, lacks most of the ideas that are in the novel. The novel is much more complex and deals with many more ideas than the screenplay. It is incredibly simplified. They don't even have the mechanical animals, which is almost one of the central ideas of the novel.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a detective thing set in the future of Los Angeles. It's 40 years in the future of L.A. A detective hunting down androids. I mean, it's Philip Marlowe meets the androids from outer space. I mean, I'll tell you one thing. I think it's going to be a successful movie. I think it's going to just simply the visual impact is going to be terrific. I've seen some photographs of some of their pre-production art, and there's no doubt that they're going to do a very professional and skillful and sophisticated movie. But it's not going to have much idea content.
Have any of the other books been optioned for film?
Oh, I have several films. Yeah, I have two other films that have been books that have been purchased. I mean, they're stories actually. One is The Second Variety, was purchased by a small studio called Capitol Pictures to make a film called Claw, and I'm working in conjunction with them. I mean, Dan O'Bannon did the screenplay.
Oh.
Now, there's another one, My Story We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. Dan O'Bannon did a screenplay for that, and Ron Shusett, who is, connected with Alien, has purchased that. They've purchased outright. Man in the High Castle is optioned, although they haven't gone beyond the optioning stage. They've announced that they're going to go into production on that. So I have actually four things in the works in Hollywood now.
The film that was inside the novel was reminding me, at least, I don't know, I guess in style, of the film of The Man Who Fell to Earth.
You got it. That's the where the idea came. It's like Madame Bovary going to see Lucia in Madame Bovary.
Okay.
In other words, I remember so well that scene where she went to see Lucia, and like that crystallized all the nebulous things that were floating around in Madame Bovary's mind. Now, that impressed me enormously. And I saw The Man Who Fell to Earth. I thought it was one of the finest films, not just science fiction film, but one of the finest films I had ever seen. I thought it was incredibly original, incredibly provocative, and rich in ideas, beautiful in texture, glorious in its overall conception. I mean, I just thought the acting was just beautiful, and it was enigmatic, and in no way is the film Valis the plot and theme of The Man Who Fell to Earth, but the idea occurred to me that a science fiction film, if well done, could be as rich as a source of knowledge and information as anything that we normally could derive our knowledge and information from. I mean, the film tremendously impressed me.
Yeah, I was impressed by its texture.
Texture, that's the right word, yeah. That's a very good word for it, yeah. The whole business with the Auden palm, and I mean, it was just a beautiful film, and I really loved it. And my use of the film Valis and the novel Valis is my homage to, that film, The Man Who Fell to Earth. I mean, it just was one of the greatest experiences of my life to see that.
It's gratifying to hear your appreciation of The Man Who Fell to Earth. That's one of my favorite films. Along with Zardoz, which I find a quirky and very entertaining film, I think that's basically the only two intelligent science fiction films I've seen. I don't know if you've seen Borman's Zardoz.
Yeah, I saw that. I liked it. I wasn't as good, but it was good. I mean, both films were good.
Mm-hmm.
But it was good. It didn't make the impression on me The Man Who Fell to Earth did.
Yeah,
I mean, there were things in The Man Who Fell to Earth that my friends and I, we went as a group, very much like in Valis, where they go in, they go once and then Kevin goes once and then drags the rest of them over. And, we've just analyzed The Man Who Fell to Earth incessantly. And we cannot explain some of the things in it. I mean, like they still remain luminous, enigmatic and provocative to us. You know, there appear to be time dysfunctions in it. You know, people wearing ancient clothing or old-fashioned clothing, you know, and things are run backward, you know, and just Jesus Christ. I mean, that was a masterpiece, definitely.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences with that film and with Rogue's previous film, Don't Look Now, although that did not hit the same chords. It hit different chords and remains as puzzling an object to me.
You know what film I liked that was like provocative, puzzling, enigmatic, and inscrutable was Altman's Three Women.
Oh, yes.
God, that just, when that was over with, I said, you know, that man melted the ontological categories of time and space and identity, reality. I mean, he did more to melt the basic ontological substance of reality than anything I had ever seen. I mean, like, I know that I read that he based it on a dream that he had.
Mm-hmm.
And although that perhaps might explain it, that whole resolution of that film at the end, it was one of the, I thought, most powerful and provocative things I'd ever seen in art, and simply inscrutable. I mean, there is no normal logic, no normal structure of reality that would account for the way that ending came with the transformation in space and the roles of those people. You know, the way they wound up at the end of that roadside cafe. I mean, it simply challenged the entire structure of reality that we normally deal with. And this, of course, is where I live. I mean, this is what I do in my own writing, is to challenge the basic structure of reality and to ask, you know, is it real? And if it is not real, what is real? And if it is semi-real, what part of it is real? And that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, Three Women they got me where I live. Really did.
Yeah, I have thought that it would make a terrific pairing to get Robert Altman to direct one of your books. You know, I cannot see very many directors out there who do the subject matter justice, and you know, many has been the time, quite seriously, when I've thought, well, if a pairing of writer and director needs to get together, this would be one I would enjoy seeing. I never saw his science fiction film Quintet.
Quintet, yeah.
And I have no idea, you know, what chords he's pressing with that one.
That was pretty good, but it repelled me because of the cruelty that the people displayed. I have a great aversion to certain forms of physical cruelty, and the depersonalized quality of the narrative. I mean, deliberately so. I mean, it was not the directorial fault. It was something he was striving for. The incredible depersonalization of the people just, you know, was finally it inflicted too much pain on me to watch, you know, to see people that depersonalized and that physically cruel to one another. But it was a very skillful film.
Uh-huh. Do you want to say anything at all about the direction that Vallis's conclusion is going to take in the second book that's coming out?
Yeah. It's resolved in terms of Judaism. The sequel, Divine Invasion, which was originally called Vallis Regained, it's set in the future. It doesn't begin where Vallis left off. There's a hiatus of a couple hundred years. But it starts out with the child born again, the child Sophia, who dies in Vallis. And the resolution is not a resolution in terms of the occult. It's not resolved even in terms of Christianity. It's resolved in terms of Judaism. And I did a very, very detailed study of the Torah and the basic tenets of Judaism for it. I mean, in other words, I studied real hard. I did my homework. I'm not Jewish, so it was something that I normally am not into. But I really studied the basis of Judaism. And when I went to write the sequel, I felt, at least, I mean, that was my subjective impression, that I understood Judaism, and I have now gained this tremendous respect for Judaism. I mean, this tremendous concept in my mind of the Torah. I mean, you know, in other words, this is much more than the Decalogue. I mean, we're not just talking about the Decalogue. I mean, the entire structure of the Torah, to me, is one of the most. It is in fact, to me, the greatest achievement of human beings in the world is the Torah. I mean, I really would seriously consider converting to Judaism now that I've studied Judaism. It just absolutely provided the resolution I wanted. I mean, it's sane, it's rational, it's rooted deeply in reality. It's humane, it's intelligent, it's deeply moving and inspiring. And so the resolution of Valis is resolved in terms of Yahweh and the Torah. The Torah is discussed endlessly in the sequel. I say a great deal about the Torah. My feeling about the Torah really is that it is from a mystical standpoint, so sublime as to beg a description. And there's very few Christians, speaking as a Christian, I'm speaking as a Christian when I say very few Christians have any conception of the beauty and magnitude and splendor of the Torah. But I got the finest reference books I could find. I got the book that is published that is by the late chief rabbi of the British Empire, who is definitely was one of the great authorities of the 20th century on the Torah. And I got his book, which was in Hebrew and in English, and contained tremendous notes. I mean, enormous notes. It was 50% notes. And we're speaking of perhaps the highest authority on the Torah in the English-speaking world. And I just wound up with this admiration for Judaism that just is to me one of the crowning moments in my life was become, aware of this great, beautiful system of thought.
A friend of the friend I was talking with this afternoon told him that he was very glad that he had read Gershom Scholem's Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism immediately before reading Valis, because he said it illuminated the book for him. And that was a comment that just didn't make any sense to me earlier today, but you seem to be tying it together for me right now.
Oh, yeah, what Sophia the child says when she speaks to them at the second meeting, what she is speaking is essentially a combination of the fourth gospel, which, in other words, there are some Christian elements, but that she is speaking in terms of the Torah. She is, in a sense, the Torah. Hagia Sophia is the Old Testament designation for the wisdom of God.
Right.
And she is not speaking merely as a Christian spokesperson. She's speaking essentially from the basis of the Torah itself. The idea of the rulers must shelter and protect. There's a lot of Old Testament thinking there that comes through when she speaks. Her charisma to them, her commission to them, is not just New Testament. It's definitely also Judaic in origin. Yeah, definitely. The influence of my interest in Judaism is invalid.
I work at a full-time job in a printing factory, and I'm in the shipping department. And through a series of circumstances, your tractate number 30 has ended up hanging over the shipping department, which confuses people no end when they see it. But the head shipper is constantly asking long before I ever mentioned any of my own interest in the same subject, what is reality? And I feel I should ask you that.
What is reality?
Yes.
Okay. Reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, it doesn't go away.
I'm sure he'll thank you.
I worked at it a long time. I worked at it in Canada. It's in Valis.
You're right.
I quote myself in Valis. If you stop believing in it and it goes away, it was a projection of your own mind. In other words, you generated it yourself. It's essentially solipsism. But if you stop believing in it and it doesn't go away, you're stuck with the word reality. That is going to have to do. I mean, you're going to have to face the fact that you're not generating it from your own mind. It is a given. It is a given. And anything that is a given that you did not create yourself and project, you're going to have to designate that reality, whatever the source of that reality may be, whether it's God, as Spinoza believed, or whatever. I mean, or Brahman, or Well, it doesn't matter. The fact is you're going to have to call it real. If you can't get rid of it by not believing in it, you're stuck with it.
Okay. Let me ask you about a line that I'm seeing in Richard Lupoff's interview preface with you, A Handful of Darkness, where you talk about inner projection stories, which you define as stories where internal psychological contents are projected into the outer world and become three-dimensional and real and concrete. Did Valis dispense with the conventional SF trappings that disguise this intention behind all your writing?
I don't think there's a link between what Lupoff is quoting me on and Valis. What Lupoff is talking about really pertains to earlier work of mine. It would be particularly applicable to the three stigmata of Palmer Eldritch and, up to Maze of Death, Ubik, Maze of Death, three stigmata, and maybe a couple others, and some of the very early stuff. But the Martian Time Slip would be a very good example. But I don't think it could be said to apply to Valis.
So once you get into Flow My Tears, the policeman said you're out of that phase.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much, yeah.
You were mentioning to me last week Bishop Timothy Archer.
Yeah, that's the new book. I still haven't heard from Hartwell. He's apparently on vacation for one more week over and above what I had understood. So apparently he comes back to work tomorrow. And so you've caught me at a very interesting time, because at this particular moment I do not know what the fate of that novel is going to be. And so it has caused me during this wait to do a lot of profound thinking about my decision to write it. I think I told you I wrote it in preference to doing a commercial novelization based on the Blade Runner screenplay.
Well, you had indicated in your letter that you decided against doing that novelization, although you were talking about a 27-year-old blonde who might entice you anyway.
Yeah, well, I decided not to call her up. She represents Blade Runner. She's the head of their publishing department. And the amount of money involved would have been very great. What they offered to do was to cut us in on the merchandising rights, but they would have required a suppression of the original novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, in favor of the commercialized novelization based on the screenplay. And they made several offers, and finally my agency computed that I would accrue conservatively about $400,000 if I did the novelization. And in contrast, if we went the route of re-releasing the original novel, I would make about $12,500. And Blade Runner was putting tremendous pressure on us to do the novelization, or to allow them to hire somebody to come in and do the novelization, like Alan Dean Foster. And we would also get a large amount of money if someone else did the novelization, although that's quite as much. But we wanted to bring out the original novel again because we felt that it was a good novel. And then also, I really did not want to write the novelization, what I call the El Cheapo novelization. I did want to do this Bishop Timothy Archer novel. And so we stuck to our guns, and at one point Blade Runner became so cold-blooded they threatened to withdraw the logo rights, which would accompany the original novel, tied into the movie release. We wouldn't be able to say, the novel on which Blade Runner was based. We wouldn't be able to use any clips from the film. And but finally we came to an agreement with them, or it seems that we have come to an agreement with them, but we are adamant about releasing the original novel. We will release it one way or another, and we will not budge. And then I have done the Bishop Timothy Archer novel, and it is, as I say, in my editor's hands, and he presumably has already read it, and it's just a question of him reporting back to me.
That's David Hartwell.
That's David Hartwell, yeah. Now, the payment on that Bishop Timothy Archer novel is very, very small. It's only $7,000. And David explained to me that it's because in the mainstream field, I'm essentially a novice writer. I'm not known, and I'm being paid on the scale that a new writer coming into the field would be paid on. The contract is a two-book contract, and there's a science fiction novel in it, and it pays exactly three times for the science fiction novel what is being paid for the Bishop Timothy Archer one. Now, they wanted the Bishop Timothy Archer one first, and I wanted to do it first. So I wrote it. And at this point, I may find that I've made a very great error, because I may find that it's not a successful book. It may be that I've lost the ability to write a literary novel, if indeed I ever had the ability to do so. It's been over 20 years since I've written a non-science fiction novel, and it is very, very problematical as to whether I can write a mainstream literary quality type novel. This is definitely an unproven thing. It's definitely an X factor, an unknown. And I may find that I turned down $400,000 and wound up with nothing, at least nothing in terms of a literary success. So I would then have to face the fact that I had suffered two defeats, one economic and the other having to do with my literary prowess. And the combined impact of this would be very traumatic to me. I mean, I couldn't justify it commercially, and I couldn't justify it in terms of artistic integrity. And so I am extremely nervous and very anxious about Hartwell's reaction.
Of course, Valis itself is just this side of not being science fiction. Personally, I don't consider it science fiction. It could have been published as a mainstream novel and received who knows what kind of attention that way. I'm sure you got more attention with it, science fiction dust jacket on it than you would have otherwise. But it seems marginally SF at best.
Yes, well, this Bishop Timothy Archer novel is essentially the third novel in a trilogy, of which Valis is the first and Divine Invasion is the second, which is sort of interesting because each book is unique. Valis being experimental, I would call it experimental science fiction, a picaresque novel, experimental science fiction. Divine Invasion is a very conventional structure for science fiction. It's almost fantasy. I mean, it's almost science fantasy. No experimental devices of any kind. And Bishop Timothy Archer in no way is science fiction, but is set, it starts out the day John Lennon is shot back in December, and then it goes into flashbacks. And yet the three do form a trilogy constellating around a basic theme. And it really was my desire to do a trilogy on this basic theme. And this is something that is extremely important to me in terms of the organic development of my themes and ideas and preoccupations in my writing. So for me to derail myself at this point and do that cheapo novelization for Blade Runner would probably have been disastrous to me artistically, although financially, as my agent explained it, I would literally be set up for life. I mean, that much money would probably last me the rest of my life. I don't think my agent figures I'm going to live much longer, so the amount I would get each year on interest alone would probably keep me alive. He figured I could accrue $60,000 a year in interest on that much money. But it really was necessary for me to do the Bishop Timothy Archer novel as a projection of thematic material going back years and years and years in my writing. It's founded even stuff as early as Eye in the Sky. And
I was very interested to finally find a copy of The Cosmic Puppets. Read that just before I read The Divine Invasion. I was fascinated by the resonance between the two books. You've got this battle between, I'm not sure how to pronounce, but you know what I mean, Ormazd and Ahriman. Occurring in The Cosmic Puppets. And I was reading this book and I was thinking, for one thing, obviously the cover had absolutely nothing to do with the book. It's the old Ace Double. I don't know if it was ever reprinted. And I was thinking, this is remarkably different from most of the science fiction that you were writing in that period. I guess that was the mid-50s when The Cosmic Puppets appeared. And then along comes the divine invasion, and I'm constantly struck by, well, this is essentially the same conflict that's taking place. It's a very different book, but you're dealing with the same themes.
That is correct, yes. In other words, these themes really go back decades in my writing, really to the origin of my professional career. There are constant preoccupations with me, and they have their own logic and their own dynamism. I mean, they unfold by their own, inner organic, drive.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really have the option of aborting that process and just suddenly going into a completely commercialized thing aimed at 12-year-olds, literally aimed at 12-year-olds. Not speaking in hyperbole, but we were told that cheapo novelization based on the screenplay would have to appeal to a 12-year-old audience, and it would be entirely derived from the screenplay, and there would be no room whatsoever for me to do anything. Well, the real answer is there already is a novel for Blade Runner, and it's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. I've already written the damn thing once, and it's almost like Dante's Inferno. I mean, the sentence passed on the writer who is sent to Inferno is that he will then rewrite all his novels, the best ones at least, as cheapo 12-year-old commercial hack stuff, and he'll be sentenced to do this for all eternity, and it would be just a terrible punishment to have to do something like that. And the fact that it would earn me a lot of money just makes it even more grotesque, actually. I mean, it just illuminates the grotesqueness of the situation. I mean, I never went into writing for money anyway. I mean, that was never my objective. There's very few writers are really in it for money. I mean, you do find that Mickey Spillane, I heard him speak once on the radio years ago, and he just said flat out he was doing it for money. He had no goals, no ambitions, no purpose in writing except to make money, and he would simply write whatever would make him the most money. Well, I thought at the time, there's somebody whose space I can't get into,
Yeah.
because I never did foresee making any real megabucks, and so when it's finally offered to me, I'm more or less apathetic toward the megabucks. I don't really need the money. I live a rather ascetic life. I don't have very many material wants. And I have no debts. My condominium is paid off. My car is paid off. My stereo is paid off. I mean, it's not an enticement that appeals to me.
That Mickey Spillane quote reminds me of a similar one from Harold Robbins, who had apparently been distributing canned peas before he got into writing. And somebody told him, here's another way to make money. And he thought, oh yeah. And that was it. He got into writing.
Well, I know one very wealthy writer who I won't mention, and he's a real nice guy, but he's just he's in it for the money, and he's got his rewards. I mean, that is, he got what he went into it for. He had been a school teacher and he wasn't making very much money, and then somehow he discerned that he could make a lot of money by writing Gothic novels. The stuff where you got the house with the house that spits goo at you, if somebody wants to describe this kind of stuff. And no doubt such writers exist, and no doubt such books exist, but I can't just suddenly switch over to being in it for the money. And there was also the possibility, now this is a very real possibility, that if I tried to do the cheapo novelization for Blade Runner, I would actually fail to do it. I would literally fail to be successful. In that case, I would be then faced with a kind of instant karma would have set in, that I would have debased myself and prostituted myself and then proved myself inadequate to the task, that I literally could not write a commercial novel that would be, something that would sell in the millions of copies. I mean, they're talking about projected sales of from 2 million to 6 million copies, and I could conceivably prove to be, without the talent, because it does take talent to do that kind of thing, without the talent to do that kind of book. I can't design soup can labels either, you see, even though there's a lot of money in that Andy Warhol can, I can't. And then I would be in an ignominious and shameful situation where I debased myself fruitlessly. So I wouldn't have the money, and I would have failed. And I kind of foresaw that as the ultimate bad scenario of all the possibilities. At least this way, I attempt the finest book I can write. I mean, I set out to write the best novel I can write. And there isn't a great deal of money involved. And if I fail, at least I will have taken my best shot. That's the thing, I will have taken my best shot. And I think a person must always take his best shot at everything. I mean, whether he repairs shoes, drives a bus, or writes novels or anything, or sells fruit. I mean, you do the best you can. Well, and then you have this terrible fear that you will acquiesce in this and then prove to be incompetent. In which case, the gods will all just fall down laughing. I mean, the gods will just, all Mount Olympus.
Well, they'll yank the chair out from under you, and then they'll all fall down.
Yeah, and so I really didn't have any difficulty in making my choice, and I must say that my agent was just marvelous in backing me up. In fact, it was quite clear that he felt that it was better to make the attempt on a literary novel, although he said he had a lot of trouble reading that Bishop Timothy Archer novel. I mean, he said that it was the first novel he tried to read during his career as an agent that he couldn't just get through essentially in one sitting. And he had tried for 4 or 5 days to read it and only been able to do like 20 pages a day, and he'd gone like for 4-hour walks after reading 20 pages. And he said, you're just never going to have a big audience for this novel. And I was thrown into vast gloom by this. But then after he finished it, he seemed to like it. But literary novels, I guess, do not necessarily have the broad appeal, I guess. It's sometimes possible to combine these two things, but it's not always possible to combine these two things. It reminds me of that comment that the editor made to Proust. And Proust originally submitted the manuscript for remembrance of things past. The editor returned it saying it is not proper for a gentleman to dilate for 40 pages on how it feels to fall asleep. But I like the manuscript. I've looked it over, and I kind of like it. The characterization is very good. I managed to get into the Bishop Timothy Archer novel 2 very good characters, the bishop himself, and then the protagonist, which is a young woman. And it's told from the first-person interior, like an inner monologue, such as Joyce used at the end of Finnegan's Wake and at the end of Ulysses both. And she's a lot younger than I am, she's a lot more educated than I am, she's a lot smarter than I am, and she's a lot more rational than I am. And she's a marvelous viewpoint character. I mean, I'm very fond of her. She's scrappy, she's bright, she's honest, she's educated, she's stable, she's healthy, she's quite responsible, and I just think she's a wonderful person. And I was very much into a postpartum depression after I finished writing it because I was so happy in enjoying her company, the companionship of her presence in my mind, listening to her dialogue, the way she talks, the way she responds. So I really loved her. I really fell in love with her. I mean, I don't know where I got her. She's entirely fictional as far as I know. I'm fictitious. I mean, I didn't base her on anybody. She's a Berkeley girl. She's a graduate from UC Berkeley from the English department. She may be a synthesis of a number of Berkeley women that I've known. But in essence, she seems to be an ad hoc creation, like Pallas Athena from the brow of Zeus, just, out of nothing, ex nihilo, as it were.
She, therefore, is not as directly taken from life as Timothy Archer is from James Pike.
That's correct. Yeah, right. Well, I needed to present the bishop. I had to have a protagonist who was smart enough to understand him and loving enough to forgive him. She had to be both smart and loving. I mean, she had to understand what he was doing, and she had to be able to emotionally understand as well as intellectually understand. Now, that's a tall order. because the bishop in the book is a very material, very complex person who does many things which are dubious ethically. And she intellectually understands what he's doing, and yes, she emotionally she's able to love him. I mean, she's his daughter-in-law. She's married to his son, and so she is required. This viewpoint character is required to have a tremendous empathic ability plus a tremendous intellect. In fact, an intellect and empathic ability that are above and beyond that of the bishop himself. So in a sense, she is more profoundly a wise person than the bishop himself. And then, of course, the climax of the book really is the effect on her of his death. In other words, it's not his death that is the climax of the book, but the effect that it has on her. And she says that it turns her into a machine. That when she heard he was dead in Israel, that she devolved to the level of a machine merely and lost her own human nature. Although at the end of the book it is revived by a Sufi scholar that is giving seminars in Sausalito, is able to restore her to the state of a human being. So it is not a bummer ending. I mean, it's a very positive ending. But there is this period where she is just reified. I mean, just totally reified. I mean, just tragically reified. And she has complete insight, and she knows it. And when the book opens, she is in that reified state. And then it goes back to the origins of the state. How did the state occur? How did she become this reified creature? You know, this mechanical creature, this very intelligent but very mechanical creature. And the flashbacks lead up finally to the bishop's death. And then she says, this is what did it. This is what turned me into a machine. And then it picks up again in the present, the day John Lennon is shot. And goes on from then.
Yeah, when you were mentioning that it opened with the Lennon assassination, I was just flipping through my notes here because I had a question to ask you about that. In me, very often the world that I look at strikes me as being an SF novel, and not necessarily a particularly good one, but I often have the feeling that I am living in a part of the future, at any rate, that I had been reading about, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I was an adolescent and I was reading science fiction. And I've occasionally a very strong sense, particularly when with the impact of something like the death of Lennon, and then with a lesser impact, but underlining it perhaps, the attempts on Reagan and on the Pope. And I wondered what that is like from your perspective, having been writing the stuff that I was reading when I was an adolescent.
Oh, Jesus, I agree with you completely. I mean, well, my agent said after he finished Bishop Timothy Archer, he said, in your science fiction, they drive things called flapples and quibbles, and in this one they drive Hondas. But he said it's still essentially a science fiction novel. He said, although I can't explain exactly how it's a science fiction novel, but it's really as if the world caught up with science fiction. I mean, in other words, the years went by and the disparity, but the temporal gap began to close until finally there was no temporal gap. You know what I mean? We were no longer writing about the future. That in a sense, the very concept of projecting it ahead is now meaningless because we are there, literally in our actual world, where in 1950 or 1955, when I write a science fiction novel, I would set it ahead. I'd set it like in the year 2200. And then all of a sudden I realized, like around 1977, that, my God, it's getting to be exactly like these novels we used to write in the 50s, I mean, everything is just coming out to be real. And this, of course, then creates in science fiction a completely fantastic type of novel, which is set on the planet Mordaria, or Malafuzia, in another galaxy, and the Malafusians all have, 18 heads, and the 16 of the Malthusians, have a sexual act together. In other words, totally fantasy science fiction. There's no connection with Earth. None of the kind of social satire and comment that you get, say, in such brilliant works as Kurt Vonnegut's Player Piano, which is a perfect example. I mean, if you read Player Piano now, you might just as well go downtown to the big agencies, the big business offices, and just walk in and sit down as read, play a piano. And this has also been pointed out about Kafka, that when Kafka's stuff was first written, it never occurred to anybody that the real world could resemble something like the castle. I mean, it was taken to be either satire, black humor, absurdism, some kind of allegory, some kind of religious, mystical thing, or some kind of lunacy. And now our world and Kafka's world have just, merged together, And this is probably going to be even more true. I mean, we're all going to wind up, like a Kafka character. We won't turn into cockroaches, literally, but we'll all wind up, in situations like in the castle, which to me is the finest of Kafka's works, or something like The Hunger Artist, or The Penal Colony. That these discrepancies between reality and this kind of surreal fiction is just dwindled away to nothing. So much science fiction now is essentially what I would call fantasy. It's science fantasy.
Yeah.
Or even space adventure. I mean, things like Star Wars, it's the Battle of Midway being fought in outer space with Douglas Trumbull effects. That was the thing about doing the Blade Runner novelization. Douglas Trumbull was doing special effects in that.
Right.
And my agent said, well, just go up there and, well, he wasn't really trying to get me to do it, but he said, if you did it, you just go up there and report on what you saw. And I could just see me coming home and trying to write down on paper a Douglas Trumbull special effects and just blowing it completely. And, just being totally unable to describe what I'd seen, And my agent said, it's just reportage, it's all you have to do. You don't have to make up anything, you see. And I thought, well, how can anybody do justice to Douglas Trumbull's special effects, I mean, it's silly. The idea is silly,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it can't, nobody can really do it. Because I had read, like the Close Encounters of the Third Kind book, the novel, and good Lord, I mean, those things are so bad that if they did not exist, nobody could imagine them,
Let me ask you about Blade Runner. Have you been on to the set?
No, I was supposed to go up there, and they called me up, and I temporized, vacillated and procrastinated, and finally they warned me they were in the last month of shooting, and then the month dwindled away. And I could just see myself going up there. And I had this vision in my mind, and I would go up there, and I would be introduced to Ridley Scott, and I'd be introduced to Harrison Ford, who's the lead character.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd just be so dazzled. I'd be like Mr. Toad, seeing the motor car for the first time. My eyes would just be as big as saucers, and I'd just be standing there just completely, mesmerized by all this and everything. And then I would watch a scene being shot, and Harrison Ford would say, lower that blast pistol, android, or you're a dead android. And I would just leap across the special effects set, just bound across it, like a veritable gazelle, and just seize him by the throat and just start battering him against the wall, and then have to run in and throw a blanket over me, and call the security guards and bring in the Thorazine. And I'd be just screaming, you've destroyed my book, and then there'd be a little item in the newspaper, obscure author becomes psychotic on a Hollywood set, minor damage, mostly to the author. And they'd have to, ship me back down to Orange County in a crate with air holes, air vents. And I'd be just still screaming, they've destroyed my work of art. But the thing about Hollywood is Hollywood can kill you even if you don't go there. Like, the negotiations we've had with Blade Runner have really worn me down in terms of, a claw. I mean, I'm just worn out, from all the intricate negotiations. I mean, they were able to renegotiate a contract where I was supposed to get $25,000, where it dropped to $12,500, and I don't even know how they were able to renegotiate a signed contract. I mean, I was standing there looking at the goddamn signed contract, you know, and say, you get $10,000 now, you get $15,000 when the film comes out. That's $25,000. And all of a sudden I get a call, and it's now down to $12,500. And I'm looking at the signed contract. And they did it by saying they would withdraw the logo rights. And then we give, you know, we make a counter offer, and it winds up, you know, well, the counter offer is they'll give us the logo rights, but I won't get any more than, you know, the minuscule amount that I essentially already had. And, you know, like, I don't even know how this is done. I don't even know how you board a signed contract. I mean, it's like contract, the whole purpose of the contract was to bind the parties irrevocably, you know. And it just, you know, finally I got to the point where I thought, no, I'll go up there. And first of all, I'm on a diet, so I can't eat the rich foods they'll serve me. And what I really hope for is a whole lot of free cocaine, and there won't be any free cocaine, and I'll be real pissed because of that, you know. And I'll keep querulously and, you know, petulantly saying, where's the cocaine? And they'll say, no, that's a myth. You've been reading TV guides, you know.
Hollywood's on hard times now. So.
Yeah. Things are not all, you know, lemonade fountains and gumdrop free, you know. Now, then also there's the beautiful starlet syndrome, you see. And yet I keep remembering, you know, this is an inducement, you know, we're going to turn you on to these foxy ladies, but I keep remembering people like F. Scott Fitzgerald, you know. I mean, one is always haunted by the specter of F. Scott Fitzgerald, you know, who goes there and they just grind him up like in a garbage disposal, you know. And just sitting here talking to them on the phone for those 2 months, I started drinking more and more. I started drinking a whole lot of scotch every night, you know. I went from drinking a thimbleful to a, you know, jigger glass, and finally to 2 wine glasses of scotch every night. And on Memorial Day, I started bleeding, gastrointestinal bleeding. And it was because of scotch, aspirin, drinking scotch and taking aspirin constantly and worrying about this whole goddamn thing. And I said, Hollywood is going to kill me by remote control. It's like our war in Vietnam, you know, we conducted all by push buttons. You know, we flew over the villages, you know, at 20,000, you know, feet and released, you know, missiles. Well, Hollywood is just flying over my head at 20,000 feet, presses a button, and I start bleeding, you know, gastrointestinal bleeding. Blade Runner started yelling at me because of an article that I wrote in the Select TV Guide about the project, because I mentioned androids. They said this is very dangerous talk, mentioning androids in connection with this film. We're not using the word android. Well, my book has the word android in the title, for God's sake, you say.
Seems inescapable.
It seems hard to avoid a word that's in the title of your own book, for God's sake. I didn't know that it was a big secret. And they had already read the Omni article, and it's all mentioned in the Omni article that came out, you know, a couple months ago. So I don't know, you know, I apparently, you know, loose talk, think shit, you know, you better watch what you're saying. And they wanted to know how I'd gotten hold of a copy of the screenplay. That's another thing. I mentioned I'd read the screenplay in an article in the Select TV Guide, and they said, how did you get hold of a copy of the screenplay? And I almost said, I flew overhead in a helicopter, and I bored through the roof in the middle of the night, and I stole the screenplay. You know, I said, well, look, it was given to me by Michael Dealey's lawyer. Michael Dealey is a producer. I legitimately acquired a copy of the screenplay. I mean, you know, I didn't dress up, you know, like a secretary in a skirt and high heels and come in and Xerox it while no one was watching, you know. I mean, I'm the author of the original book. You know, I get to look at the screenplay, you know. I mean, see, that's the only. How did you get a hold of the screenplay, they said. With emphasis on the word you know, you in italics and underlined, you know, and caps.
It's you of all people.
You of all people in the world. What the hell went wrong that we let you see the screenplay, you see? And I had to assuage their grim concern.
So is Blade Runner going to be a film where the special effects are the central theme, in effect?
You got it. That's right. Yep. That was what I said in my Select TV article. We saw that in Alien. Ridley Scott is a director who has a visual sense rather than a narrative sense. I mean, I don't think this is disputed. I mean, this is not a matter of me insulting Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott works on visual effects. He thinks visually. He sees. I mean, and of course, this is why he's in movies. You know, movies are something you look at and they move. That's why they're called movies. And you know, this is perhaps the way it should be. But I am an author, and I think in narrative terms. I think in terms of a storyline.
I want to talk to you about that process that you were sort of referring to yourself earlier, about what made you into a writer. You were saying that it wasn't for the money. When did you make your first prose sales, and how long were you writing before that, and what got you into it in the first place, I guess?
Well, I started my first novel when I was 13 years old. That's God's truth. I taught myself to type while I was in junior high, and started my first novel when I was in the 8th grade. I don't know if that works out to 13, but I was in the 8th grade, and it was called Return to Lilliput. And I made my first sale in November of 1951. And my first stories were published in 1952. And I had, at the time I graduated from high school, I was writing regularly. I was very soon writing one novel after another, none of which, of course, sold. And I wrote both science fiction and literary type novels. I was living in Berkeley, and all the milieu reinforcement in Berkeley was for the literary stuff. Now, I knew all kinds of people who were doing literary type novels, avant-garde novels. And I knew some of the very fine avant-garde poets in the Bay Area, people like Robert Duncan, you know, and Jack Spicer and those people, that whole crowd. Philip Lamantia and so on. And they all encouraged me to write, but by and large there was no encouragement to write science fiction, and there was no encouragement particularly to sell anything. But I wanted to write and sell, and I also wanted to do science fiction. So, you know, my ultimate dream was to be able to do both literary stuff and science fiction. Well, it didn't work out that way. I wasn't able to sell literary stuff. You know, Confession of a Crap Artist, which I wrote in the late 50s, was finally issued by a little publisher, and Whittle Press, in an edition of 6,000 copies.
Do you have any plans for that forthcoming SF?
Yeah, I've done two different outlines. I have two different possibilities. I'll probably wind up laminating the two outlines together and making one book out of it, which is what I'd like to do very much, is develop independent outlines and then laminate them into one book. That's where I get my multiple plot ideas, is doing that. I really enjoy doing that, a paste-up job.
What?
Synthesis, in other words.
Obviously, you're reading science fiction as a young teenager. What contemporary writers do you enjoy reading?
Well, you mean now or at that time?
Well, both, I guess.
Well, at that time, I was big seeing as how I was living in Berkeley. I was reading, you know, what the Berkeley intellectual community was reading, which is, of course, everything from, you know, Finnegan's Wake on down to Dos Passos. I mean, in other words, you could not get into a party unless you had read, let's see, I'm trying to think back now what we were reading at that time. Sherwood Anderson and people like that, Clifford Odets and so on. And then, of course, you know, Ulysses. And then I was reading some of the lesser-known modern writers that were connected with a series of pocketbooks called Discovery. And these were people like...
I've seen those.
Oh, you have seen those. Good. I bought every one of those. In fact, there's a letter from me printed in one of them. And the second one. William Styron was one of them. Herb Gold was one. I finally met Herb Gold. I was very impressed by those. I mean, I tried to keep up on what was contemporary. I was even reading contemporary Japanese novels, you know, their translations of their work in English. I read a lot of the French novelists, the French realistic novelists, Balzac and Stendhal and Flaubert. And I loved Turgenev, and then, of course, we all read Dostoevsky. But, I mean, I would branch out into lesser-known people, you know, where it's like, instead of just reading Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, you know, I would turn to some of the lesser-known Russian writers. Even some of the surrealist Russian writers that wrote just after the Russian Revolution in 1917. most people don't even know about them. There was a period of extreme experimentation under Lenin.
Yeah, that wouldn't be someone like Yuri Oleshev.
Christ, I don't even remember who these guys were. I mean, they were real good. I mean, I remember reading Hans Fallada's, Little Man, What Now, and I read Celine, Journey to the End of the Night, and I read Ernst Jünger's On the Marble Cliffs, and I was also reading a lot of philosophy. That I was even that early, I was reading Moses Maimonides' Guide to the Perplexed. And my wife came home one time from school, and she says, "What is it you're reading again?" And I said, "Moses Maimonides' Guide to the Perplexed." He says, "Yeah, well," she says, "my instructor." She says, "I mentioned that to my instructor." And he says, "You're probably the only human being on the face of the earth today who, at this moment, is reading Moses Maimonides." I just sitting there reading it, eating a ham sandwich and reading it. It didn't strike me as odd. I had access to the stacks at the Berkeley UC Library. I had gone to Berkeley, UC Berkeley for a little while, and had been kicked out because they wouldn't take ROTC. And a friend of mine had gotten a professor there to sign a thing that gave me a card, and it gave me stack privileges, which I hadn't had as an undergraduate. I'd go right in the stacks. I got all kinds of stuff out. I got, Plautus, the Roman playwright. I got checked out a book of Plautus's. It was published in 1585. I had a tremendous time, wandering around the closed stacks, the B stacks they called them. And I would come home with the damnedest things, I mean, I just kept walking home with a stack of really, really obscure books. I just gravitated towards obscure books. I loved them. I loved books. I loved the library. I loved being able to go into the stacks. I mean, I just read all the time. Yeah, I read a lot of science fiction. I love science fiction.
Well, let me ask you about a couple of contemporary science fiction writers. I'll just toss out a couple of names and see if you have any opinion on them. John Varley is very hot now, obviously.
Yeah, he's good. He's awfully good. His Overdrawn the Memory Bank, I thought, was one of the best stories I'd ever read. My agent called my attention to that. He said it was very, very interesting in its resemblance to some of my stuff, and it's absolute diametric opposite to some of my stuff. He called it the flip side to some of my stuff. And, I like Farley a lot. I think he's excellent writer.
And then A. Van Vogt is obviously a novelist who had an influence on you.
Yes, and I met him originally in 1954 and liked him as a person very much. I have a lot of respect for Van as a person, too, as well as a writer. I think he's a very, very fine person. I think his writing has been unjustly criticized as being, the criticism that it doesn't hang together, it isn't logical and so on. I think it's just very, 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 very exciting, very original. I read it when it came out originally in 1941, 2 and 3, when it was first published, the Weapon Shop stories, and seeing as how I read the stuff when it came out, I can verify that there was nothing like it before Van Vogt. I mean, in other words, when he started doing those Weapon Shop stories, there had never been anything like that in science fiction. He's just not credited with extreme verve, and originality along that his writing has. Now we can look back at that stuff and see the flaws, but believe me, to pick up a 1943 Astounding and read a Van Vogt short novel like Recruiting Station, it was just thrilling. And I remember when The World with No Leg came out, I mean, we were just entranced. We couldn't make head nor tail of it either. And all this is pointed out now that doesn't make sense. But it was just so thrilling and so exciting. And it had the essential ingredients of science fiction, that what Damon and I call the sense of wonder. Mm-hmm. It was just electric. It was just gorgeous. And Heinlein, too, for that matter.
What about R.A. Lafferty?
Lafferty is a superb writer. He is a superb writer, not just science fiction writer, but superb writer, qual writer. I mean, I have read stuff by him that is as good as any writing I've ever read.
Now, he deeply impresses me.
Oh, somebody called my attention to his stuff, and I just flipped out over him. I think he is one of the most important American writers today, of any kind whatsoever. And will so be regarded by history as not just a good science fiction writer, but as a major surrealist, just a major surrealist writer, equal to Nathaniel West's, well, I guess Nathaniel West isn't the best example, but I mean, just an extremely important writer.
And on another plane altogether, Stephen King.
Well, I tried some of Stephen King's, but my impression, and this may be just because I didn't read very much, it seemed to be very derivative. I mean, I couldn't see the reason for the enthusiasm. It just seemed very derivative. In fact, the reason I started reading it, this friend of mine, she said to me, she says, you know, I've been reading these Stephen King stories, and I swear to God, he's writing like you used to write in the 50s. And I read, you know, she didn't mean he plagiarized me. She just meant, you know, like I had written in the 50s, that kind of stuff. And I read a few of his stories. I thought, Christ, we were writing these for Tony Boucher's F&SF back in the 50s. I mean, this guy's 20 years out of date. This guy's an anachronism.
Let me ask you about The Man in the High Castle, which I have a personal fondness for because it was the first of your books that I read. I remember buying the thing off the spin rack in the back of Salvanor's store around the corner from me. I was wondering what it was. I don't know, I must have been 12 years old or something at the time. It looked like a war novel to me because of that cover that was on the paperback edition.
Yeah, right.
And I thought, geez, this can't be a war novel. This just doesn't make any sense. But it really was very difficult to discern from the cover that it was SF. What are your memories of writing that book?
Oh, well, I got 8 years of talk to tell you about that. I had given up writing science fiction in the year 1959. The science fiction field totally collapsed. The readership shrank down to 100,000 readers total. Now, to show you how few readers that is, 100,000 total, Solar Lottery had sold 300,000 copies, you see, but which was published in 1955. And in 59, we only had 100,000 readers. Many writers had left the field. We could not make a living. Most of the magazines had collapsed. All, in fact, had collapsed except for Galaxy and Astounding and maybe one more, F&SF. And I had gone to work for making jewelry with my wife. And I wasn't happy in the jewelry business. I didn't enjoy making jewelry. I wasn't any good at it. I had no talent whatsoever. She had the talent, and she is still a jeweler and a very, very fine jeweler now, making marvelous jewelry. Just, it's gorgeous stuff, which she sells to like Neiman Marcus, you know. I mean, it's great art, but you know, I couldn't do anything except polish what she made. You know, I polish up the stuff that she made. So I decided I'd better tell her I was working on a book, see, so I wouldn't have to polish her jewelry all day long. So I said I was writing a book, and I had no notes or anything, you know, and we owned a little cabin, and I went over there with a little $65 portable typewriter made in Hong Kong. The E key was stuck on, and I just sat there and started out with nothing but the name Mr. Tagomi written down on a scrap of paper, no other notes. And I've been reading a lot of Oriental philosophy. I've been reading a lot of Zen Buddhism, you know, and I've been reading the I Ching, and I was really into all that stuff. You know, that was the rage at that time in the, that was the Marin County, I was living in Marin County, that was the Marin County zeitgeist at that point, was Zen Buddhism and the I Ching, you see. And I just, you know, started right out and kept on trucking. It was either that or go back to polishing jewelry. And when I got the novel finished, when I had the manuscript finished, I showed it to her, and she said, well, she read it over, and she said, well, it's all right, but she says, you'll never make more than $750 off it. I don't even see where it's worth your while to submit it to your agent. I said, well, why don't I just do it anyway? You know, what the hell? And then it was bought by Putnam's for $1,500, which isn't a great deal more than she had prophesied, but they did not publish it exactly as science fiction. They ran an ad for it in the New York Times, and it wasn't severely advertised, but it did get tremendous reviews. I mean, it was very, very well reviewed. It got an amazing amount of reviews, and part of that was due to the good fortune that it was picked up by the Science Fiction Book Club. Had it not been picked up by the Science Fiction Book Club, it would not have won the Hugo Award. I mean, because the edition would have been too small. In fact, I believe it may have been one of the first hardcover books to win the Hugo Award. It had only been about 4 years the Hugo Award up until then. But Avram Davidson at FNSF did a lot to get that book promoted. He did a lot for me. Now, Tony Boucher called that book a failure. I heard him review it on KPSA on the radio, and he said that it was not a science fiction novel. It was actually just a mainstream novel once you got past the alternate world premise, and he did not regard it as science fiction. Later, he came up to me and said that he now felt that it was a breakthrough novel. And Donald Wollheim said it was not science fiction. He said it is sick, dated, and not science fiction. So there was some negative criticism of it. But most of the criticism was very positive. P. Schuyler Miller in Astounding reviewed it very, very favorably. It was one of the best reviews I ever got from Astounding.
I guess Len Dayton is having some success right now with an alternate World War II premise novel. I think it's, what is it, XPB or XPD? It's one or the other. Has a fairly similar basis. Someone else wins World War II. I forget in Dayton's case who it is. But,
well, how many people were there in the war? We're limited to a small number of people.
It's the Italians in this version.
Italians in this version. I'd like to see how he figures how they did that. That's one thing I had to do. Now, I must admit that I had thought for years about writing an alternate world novel in which the Axis won World War II. I did start without written notes, but I had done research. I had done 7 years of research at the stacks and post-stacks at UC Berkeley. And I looked at prime Gestapo documents, because I can read some German, and I had looked at prime SS Gestapo documents marked in German for the eyes of the higher police only, which is Gestapo. And I read diaries of Gestapo agents. And I had really done my research, but I had to figure out how the Nazis could, if they had won World War II, how they could have done it. And I had structured out the decisions that they would have had to make, the changes in history that would have permitted them to win that war. And there was something like about 11 different things that would have had to happen that for them to win the war. Mm-hmm. I mean, in other words, there was no one single thing that would have done it. And they're not all in Man in the High Castle. But if I had to, I could actually stand at a blackboard and chart out the only way that the Axis could have won that war. And it would be a very long list of things that would have had to happen. Just for an example, Spain would have had granted them the right to go through Spain, from France down there to take Gibraltar and close off the Mediterranean, things like that. Mm-hmm. Take a whole bunch of things to do it. That war was not really as close a call as we thought it was. For example, there's almost no way they could have defeated Russia. I mean, it is not that easy to defeat Russia. As certain people in history have found out.
Too damn big, or
I hope we're not about to find that out ourselves too. Another campaign directed at taking Moscow in 3 weeks is going to wind up like all the other campaigns in Moscow in 3 weeks. I can see Reagan and Haig, sitting there and saying, "Well, hell, man, we'll be in Moscow in 3 weeks." And somebody says, that expression, 3 weeks, rings a bell. I think I've heard that expression before. It has something to do with a long Russian novel by Tolstoy and the French,
Yes.
And then Haig says, "Well, all right, 4 weeks, but NATO's tanks will be in Moscow in 4 weeks, That's assuming this nice weather holds out. It's almost worth writing a story about Haig and Reagan, figuring if the balmy weather will just hold out another week, there should be no problems.
I used to have dreams in which I would meet Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon, and they would try to explain their foreign policy to me. This was when they were in office. They would sit me down and they would say, "Well, look, the reason we're invading Cambodia is this." And they'd show me charts, and I'd argue it out with them. To no avail, but I'd wake up feeling satisfied.
What a way to spend a night.
But, having Reagan and Haig in office smacks very much of the thing we were talking about earlier in terms of the present as future. It's like, I just can't relate to this world with these two guys running the country. It's like, what happened here?
Oh, well, these guys, I mean, I think we discussed this before. I've now become somewhat of an amateur student of the Jewish scriptures, the Torah.
Yes.
And I was reading reading Deuteronomy last night, and reading some of the notes. and this Rabbi Hertz, who is the late chief rabbi of the British Empire, had put in extensive notes. And the humane elements of the Torah, which is so old, Deuteronomy is so old that it goes back to pre-literate days among the Jews. I mean, it actually was formulated a lot of these things before they even had a written language. And I thought, my God, the injunctions in the Torah in Deuteronomy about caring for the needy, caring for the sick, caring for the poor, caring for the helpless, caring for the disadvantaged, are built into this thing, which is maybe 3,000 years old and has worked for 3,000 years. And now we're hearing, that the kids don't get hot lunch programs, and the elderly, don't get their Social Security, and just every kind of nightmare thing, that everybody will have to, get by on his own, I thought, we're not seeing the clock turned back to 1912 before the graduated income tax, was enacted, We're seeing it turn back. We're seeing it turn back to imperial Rome, where I think it was Seneca said one time. He said, "There's no use giving food to the starving; it'll just prolong their miserable lives." He actually said that, and Rabbi Hertz quotes him, saying the Roman attitude towards those who were hungry and those who were sick was, that being hungry, poor, and sick, you deserve to die anyway, and that this was a tremendous collision between Judaism and its humanity and Rome, and I thought, well, my God, we're turning the clock back to the imperial days, of Caesar Augustus.
73 Christian era.
It would be. It would essentially be. It would be before the Judeo-Christian ethics impinged on the empire, and they impinged on the empire not just through the Christians, but also through, Philo of Alexandria, who was the first philosopher. Interestingly enough, it makes you stop and think. He was the first Western philosopher to include as a virtue the virtue of what he called humanity, which he defined as assisting the needy. This is incredible. And we're seeing a return to the old imperial system, of let the disadvantaged sink to the bottom, let them die, just let them die. And this is so tragic and so inhumane, that it just simply beggars description. There was a book that came out about Nazi Germany in the 40s, and it was called Germany Turns the Clock Back. And it was by one of the American reporters over there. I forget which one, but he was a very reputable American reporter, and he was stationed in Germany. And his theory was that the Nazis essentially just turned the clock back a couple thousand years, to kind of a pre-Christian ethics system. But we are in a time, where there is essentially a cruel spirit abroad. Across the land, and it just seems to be, gathering momentum. I feel, this cruel spirit. I have very close personal friends who are showing symptoms of great cruelty and interest only in their own individual welfare. These are people who at one time had been in the anti-war movement, been very idealistic, are now exhibiting just a complete narcissism, complete me first, look out for number one type of thing.
In fact, I would like to send you a copy of the piece that's going to eventually appear based on this.
I'm very anxious to see the piece. I'll have to be quite honest with you. You've asked the best questions anybody's ever asked. I thought I was going to get these. There are certain questions that keep cropping up, and they're dumb questions. And you get to the point where you just kind of go nuts when you hear these dumb questions. And they're like, I'll give you just one example. Where do you get your ideas? And, the next person asks me that, I'm just going to start raving like a madman, But you have not asked a silly question, a stupid question, or anything. You've asked beautiful questions. It's been a great pleasure talking to you, John. I really has.